The knock came back. 2 beats. Measured. Patient. From somewhere behind the plaster, behind the pipes, behind whatever gap exists between the wall she can touch and the dark she cannot reach. She had done it without thinking, the way she always did. A private punctuation mark at the end of a sleepless night, 2 knuckles against the cabinet above the stove, a habit formed so long ago she could not remember its origin. She had never done it in front of anyone, had never mentioned it, had never once considered that it was the kind of thing worth mentioning because it was hers alone, a small and wordless ritual belonging to no one but herself. And something had answered. She stands at the stove with her hand still raised, fingers curled, the cooling air of the kitchen pressing against her bare arms. The refrigerator hums. The faucet holds a single bead of water at its lip. Everything in the room is exactly as it was 30 seconds ago, and nothing will ever be the same again. She's trying to convince herself it was a pipe, the way pipes knock and groan in old houses, the way heat moves through metal and makes sounds that only approximate intention. But pipes do not wait. They do not listen for the specific rhythm of a woman standing alone at 2 a.m. and then mirror it back with the same careful, unhurried spacing she herself had used. Something in this house has been paying attention. The only question is how long. The sounds had started 2 weeks before, small enough to fold into ordinary explanation and set aside. The first was the hallway upstairs, a slow creak that moved from the east end to the west, always east to west, never the reverse, at the unhurried pace of someone who was not in any particular hurry to arrive. She had heard it 3 nights running before she noticed the direction. Then she noticed it every time. The floors in this house were old, white oak gone grey at the grain, and they spoke freely under weight. But they also spoke freely under temperature shifts, under the subtle pressure of a structure breathing against the cold. She'd told herself this. She'd believed it, or believed enough of it to close her eyes again. The second was the basement, a low, resonant groan that climbed up through the foundation and pooled somewhere beneath the kitchen floor, a sound she associated immediately with the old water heater, the one that had been removed and replaced with a tankless unit installed on the wall near the utility sink. She had stood at the top of the basement stairs and listened to it and thought, old pipes, old house, and had gone back to bed. What she feels now, standing at the stove with her knuckles still warm from the knock, is something close to shame. Not fear, not yet, though fear is nearby and moving closer. Shame, because she had found it comforting, the idea of a house with its own restless interior life. She had felt less alone. She bought the notebook at the pharmacy on a Tuesday, a plain brown thing with a spiral binding, and told herself it was a practical measure. She was a practical woman. She had spreadsheets for her finances and a colour-coded calendar, and a system for her email that had never once failed her. A notebook was simply a tool. It meant nothing that she had felt her hands shaking slightly at the checkout counter. The first week of entries read like the log of a rational person. 11:42 p.m. study, wall behind bookcase, 2 distinct pops followed by settling. 1:15 a.m. bedroom, east wall, low groan, approximately 4 seconds. She used precise language. She noted temperature and weather. She was building a case for ordinary explanation, and for a few days it almost worked. Then she drew the map. She had done it almost without thinking, sketching the rough floor plan at the back of the notebook to make the location data easier to track, and when she transferred her entries onto it and stepped back to look at what she had made, the cold that moved through her had nothing to do with the draft from the old window casings. Every mark was near her. Study, bedroom, kitchen, hallway. A constellation that had her at its centre. She checked the timestamps again, carefully, because she needed to be wrong about this. She was not wrong. The sounds in the study began while she was still washing her face down the hall. The hallway creak started before her foot touched the first step. The house was not responding to her presence. It was anticipating it. She called Daniel on a Thursday, and he came that Saturday with his work boots still chalky from a job site, the way he always arrived, already oriented toward fixing things. He walked the perimeter first, crouching at the foundation, pressing his palm flat against the siding in several places. She watched him from the porch and felt a complicated gratitude, the kind that already contains its own disappointment. Inside, he moved through the rooms with the unhurried confidence of a man who had spent 30 years learning the private languages of old structures. He pressed his ear to the plaster in the study. He knelt in the hallway and tested the subfloor with his weight, rocking forward and back. Clay soil, he told her. Thermal expansion. Dry joists that swell in summer and release at night. He said it the way you say something true. She almost let it be enough. Before he left, she asked him, and she kept her voice level when she did, to knock on the kitchen wall. The same wall. He gave her a patient look and knocked once, a solid rap with 2 knuckles, and the sound moved through the plaster and was absorbed, and there was nothing. Just the refrigerator's low hum and the particular quality of silence that follows a question no one answers. She smiled and said, "Never mind." 20 minutes after his truck turned off the street, the knock came. Single. Precise. From the exact place his hand had landed. Not an echo. Not the house settling into the afternoon. An answer given only once he was gone. She told herself she needed data. That was the word she used in the log she had started keeping in a green notebook on the kitchen counter. The same notebook where she had once recorded soil pH levels and precipitation totals for a research project that felt like it belonged to someone else's life. Data. Methodology. Controlled conditions. She developed the knocking system the way she developed most things, incrementally and without fully admitting what she was doing. 2 knocks before the stairs, 3 before leaving a room. She wrote down the times and the responses, and she did not look at the pattern directly, the way you avoid looking at something bright. When she finally looked, the pattern looked back. She stood in the hallway on a Tuesday evening with the green notebook open in her left hand, and she thought about what it would mean if it was real, and she thought about what it would mean if it was not, and she decided those 2 things were no longer as different as they had once seemed. She knocked 4 times slowly, then once, fast. A sequence she had not used before, had not written down, had constructed in the moment from nothing, from pure invention. The house gave her silence. She counted. She got to 53 before she stopped counting and stood very still with her soles flat on the floor. It started below her feet. Not a sound so much as a presence inside the wood. 4 low pulses, spread and deliberate. Then 1 sharp tap, quick as a period at the end of a sentence already written. She woke at 4 in the morning to a sound she had not made. It was coming from the wall beside her bed, from somewhere inside it. Not a knock, but something slower and more deliberate. A dragging. A soft lateral pressure moving against the interior surface of the plaster, as though something were being drawn across it with great care. She lay rigid under the sheet and listened, and her mind tried to give it names. A branch, a pipe contracting in the cold, a small animal caught in the cavity between the lath and the exterior siding. None of the names fit the sound. The sound fit nothing. She reached for her phone and started the timer because timing things was how she kept the world from tilting completely off its axis. The dragging continued, unhurried, rhythmic without being regular, the way breathing is rhythmic, the way something alive is rhythmic. She realized at some point that she had pressed both fists hard against her sternum, and she did not remember deciding to do that. 11 minutes, then nothing. She did not sleep again. In the grey flat light of early morning, she stood in the bedroom doorway for a long time before she crossed to the wall. The baseboard along the lower section had pulled slightly away from the plaster, a thin, dark gap she was certain had not been there the night before. She knelt. She looked. Behind it, pressed flush against the old lath as though someone had smoothed it there by hand, was a single page of paper, covered from edge to edge in small and careful writing. She read it twice. The second time changed nothing. The handwriting was hers in every particular. The slight leftward lean she had never been able to correct. The way her lowercase e closed too tightly at the top. The habit of pressing harder on the downstrokes when she was concentrating. It was hers the way her face in a mirror was hers, familiar and answerable and somehow not entirely under her authority. The date sat at the top of the page like a fact she had not yet earned. 6 weeks from today. She mouthed the words without speaking them and felt the number settle into her chest and stay there, dense and specific. She read about the woman moving through the house room by room. She read it in the present tense the way it was written, and something in her nervous system understood before her mind did, because her body had already turned slightly toward the door by the time she reached the final sentence. She stands in the bedroom for a very long time. She read herself reading. She felt the recursion of it open beneath her like a depth she could not measure. Then the floor spoke. 3 knocks from directly below, spaced and certain, rising up through the boards into the soles of her bare feet, into her ankles, into her teeth. Not loud. They did not need to be loud. They were the kind of sound that does not ask permission. She knew what they meant. She did not know how she knew, only that she did completely, the way you know your own name spoken in a dark room. She left the room. She stepped out of the bedroom and into the hallway, and the understanding arrived not as a thought, but as a physical sensation, a slow, cold pressure behind the sternum, the kind of thing the body knows before the mind has the courage to. She had not taught the house a language. The house had taught her one. Every knock she believed was spontaneous. Every sequence she had noted in the margins of her notebook with a small private pride had been a response, a repetition, a lesson carried up through the walls and into her hands while she slept half awake at the kitchen counter, while she stood barefoot on the cold tile, while she believed herself to be the one asking questions. She had been answering. She had only ever been answering. She thought about the first night, 2 knocks above the stove. She had always remembered it as hers, her knuckles against the cabinet, an experiment. But now the sequence opened differently in her memory and she could feel it. The faint prior sound beneath the floor, beneath the threshold of intention, soft enough that it had reached her hands before it reached her ears. Something had knocked first. She had knocked second. She had been doing so ever since. The notebook was not a record of her investigation. It was a transcript of her instruction. She stood very still in the hallway and listened to herself breathe, and then from somewhere deep inside the wall beside her, close enough to touch, came a single knock. She knew what it meant. It meant good. Mara had not moved in over a minute. The kitchen was the kind of quiet that presses against your ears, the refrigerator having clicked off sometime in the last hour, the house settling into itself the way old houses do when they think no one is paying attention. She sat with her hands flat on the table, the notepad between them, the numbers she had written looking back at her in her own careful handwriting. She had chosen the question deliberately, something no one could guess, something she had never posted online, never mentioned in any room with a smart device, never written anywhere that could be indexed or searched or scraped. Her mother's name was not unusual, but it was hers, and the asking of it felt like the closing of a circuit she was not sure she wanted to complete. She had spoken it into the room at 11:46 and then sat back and waited with the particular stillness of someone who expects nothing and is afraid of being wrong about that. The knocks came from inside the wall behind the stove, not the pipes. She knew the pipes. This was deliberate. 3, and then a pause long enough to feel intentional, and then 2, and then another pause, and then 1. She looked down at the notepad. 3 + 2 + 1, 6. Her mother's name began with a G. G was the 7th letter of the alphabet. She told herself 6 was not 7. She told herself that twice. The second time, her hands had started to shake. She had moved in on a February afternoon so grey and still that the street looked like a photograph of itself, every bare tree identical, every parked car coated in the same thin skin of old salt and road dust. The landlord had handed her the keys in the driveway and pointed upward at the eaves, and said the radiators would groan all night the first week and then you stop hearing them. He was right about that. She stopped hearing them by the 3rd night. The knocking started on the 4th. It came from the wall in the upstairs hallway, a section of plaster between the linen closet and the bathroom door that had no pipes running through it, nothing behind it but the hollow dark between the outer wall and the inner one. She pressed her ear against it the first time she heard it, and felt nothing. No vibration, no hum, only the cold radiating off the plaster into the side of her face. 2 knocks, a pause, 2 more. She catalogued it as squirrels. February was cold enough to send them looking for warmth inside walls, and she had heard of stranger things in old houses, and she needed to sleep, and so she decided it was squirrels and she went to sleep. She told herself squirrels for 11 days. Then she was on the phone with her sister in the kitchen, laughing about something that had happened at her sister's job, something ordinary, and she said without any thought at all that she wished the week was over, and the wall behind the stove knocked 4 times. She started the log on a Tuesday, a cheap spiral notebook she bought from the pharmacy on the corner, and she told herself it was the rational thing to do. Documentation, evidence toward a mundane explanation. She wrote the date in the top corner of the first page with the careful handwriting of someone trying to stay calm. By Thursday, she had stopped trying to explain it away. The pattern was not hidden. It did not require interpretation or inference or any particular intelligence on her part. It was simply there, the way a stain is there once you have seen it, undeniable and permanent. The knocking did not happen when she was quiet. It happened when she opened her mouth, or when she was lying in bed in that particular pitch of wakefulness, where thoughts move through you like speech, loud and directionless and private. She had said, stirring her coffee, that she missed her old apartment. 4 knocks, slow, deliberate. She had thought, standing at the bathroom mirror, that she did not know how much longer she could afford to stay. 3 knocks, then a pause so long she thought it was finished, then 3 more. She began to see the shape of it, loss, want, the raw, exposed places. She wrote in the margin, in handwriting smaller than her own, as though she were trying to hide it from herself. It is responding to need. She crossed it out with 2 hard strokes of the pen. Then she smoothed the page with her thumb and wrote it again. She called the landlord on a Friday morning, standing at the counter with the notebook open in front of her, and she kept her voice the way she kept her handwriting, careful and even, the voice of someone conducting reasonable research. She asked about the history of the house. He told her it was built in 1931. He told her about Cresswell the way people tell you about things they have decided are unremarkable, the way they flatten a life into a few useful facts. 1 owner, 61 years. She wrote the name in the margin. She asked how he died. The landlord paused. Passed in his sleep, he said. In the house. There was something in the pause before that last part, something she recognized as the particular hesitation of a person deciding how much to offer. She asked which room. He told her. She was already standing in it. She had been standing in it the whole time, the phone warm against her ear, the notebook on the counter, the wall behind the stove close enough that she could have reached out and laid her palm flat against it. She looked at the wall. The wall was quiet. It stayed quiet in a way that felt considered, in a way that felt like a held breath. She had not realized until that moment that some part of her had been waiting for it, that she had asked the question not because she wanted to know, but because she wanted the wall to answer. She had been asking it questions all along. She told herself it was methodology. She sat down at the kitchen table with the notebook and wrote the rules in a column down the left margin, neat and numbered, the handwriting of someone who was not afraid. 1 knock for yes, 2 knocks for no. She would ask only things she already knew. She would keep records. She asked if she was born in a city. The knock came before she'd finished exhaling. Once, clean and close, from somewhere behind the plaster near the stove. She wrote it down. She asked if her father was still alive. 2 knocks. A brief pause between them, as though the second were a confirmation of the first. She pressed her pen into the paper hard enough to score the page beneath. She asked if she'd ever broken a bone. Once, low and immediate, almost impatient. She sat back in the chair and looked at her hands and saw that they were shaking. Not trembling, but shaking. The way hands shake when the body has decided something the mind has not yet agreed to. Every answer correct. Every answer returned in the same tone, the same register, the same quality of presence, as though something had been waiting for the right kind of question for a very long time. She meant to close the notebook. Instead, she heard herself ask if it had known Cresswell. The silence that followed was different from the other silences. It had weight to it and texture, and what she could only think of as reluctance. Then 1 knock came, slow, deliberate, as though the answer had cost something. She pulled the thread. She asked if it was Cresswell knocking, and the 2 knocks came back so fast she felt them in her sternum before she heard them with her ears. Not Cresswell. She wrote it down. She asked if something had come into the house with him, and the single knock arrived the way a stone arrives at the bottom of a well, certain and final. She asked if it had been here before him. Once. She asked if it had been here when the house was built. Once, from somewhere very low in the wall, almost at the floor, as though whatever was answering had leaned down to say so. She steadied her pen above the paper and asked how long it had been here. The silence stretched long enough that she thought it had finished, that she had found the edge of what it would give her. Then the knocking began. Not the clean, precise strikes from before, but something continuous, rolling, moving through the wall like a current through water, passing through the plaster behind the stove and across to the far corner and up through the ceiling above her head. She counted to 10 and then stopped counting because the number was clearly not the point. The point was that there was no number. The point was that it wanted her to understand there was no number. It went on for nearly 40 seconds. When it stopped, the room felt enormous. She slept in her car that night with the engine running and the doors locked and the heater going and all the light it made. In the morning she went back inside. Not because she was brave, because she could not afford to be anywhere else, and because, and this was the part she could not write in the notebook, she had not felt that accompanied in longer than she wanted to name. The weeks folded into each other the way weeks do when a person stops fighting a place and starts simply living in it. She talked to it the way she had once talked to herself, filling the quiet of the kitchen in the evenings, narrating the small indignities of her days, the broken copier at work, the parking ticket, the phone call from her landlord about the previous apartment that she owed money on and could not pay. The knocking came back in fragments, in pauses, in the particular silence that falls when someone is listening rather than simply waiting for you to stop. She knew what she was doing. She had taken a course in college on cognitive bias, and she could name the mechanism precisely. It did not stop her. She called her sister on a Thursday and tried to describe the arrangement without using any of the words that would make her sister worried. And her sister said it sounded like she was lonely, and Mara said maybe, and stared at the far wall while her sister talked about something else. That night she sat at the kitchen table with no notebook and no pen and asked it, quietly, whether it was lonely too. One knock, from very close, just behind the plaster near her shoulder. She asked if that was why it answered need rather than invitation. One knock. She asked if it answered anyone who stayed here, or whether it was something more specific than that. The pause was long enough that the refrigerator cycled through a full hum and went quiet again. Then one knock. She looked at her hands on the table and asked, in a voice she had not planned to use, whether it had chosen her. The silence before the answer was the longest yet, as though something old was considering how honest to be. Then one knock, so close and so soft it felt less like a sound than like a breath against the back of her neck. She found the box on a Sunday, shoved behind the winter coat, still taped the way she had taped it in the old apartment 4 years ago. She did not remember packing it. She did not remember most of that year. The photograph was near the bottom, tucked inside a book she had never finished. A grief support group, 8 or 9 people arranged in a loose row in a church basement. Fluorescent light washing the colour out of everyone. She remembered the group the way she remembered most things from that period, through gauze, at a remove. She remembered the coffee that was always burnt. She did not remember the man standing 2 people to her left. He was old and lean, and he stood slightly apart from the others, not touching, not smiling, looking at the camera with the patient expression of someone who had already been waiting a long time before the picture was taken. She turned it over. The names were written in pencil, faint and careful, someone's small act of record-keeping. She found her own name. She counted. 2 to the left. Cresswell. She sat on the floor of the closet with the photograph in both hands and did not move for a long time. She thought about a room full of people who had all lost something. She thought about need as a frequency, about grief as a kind of door left open. She thought about something old enough to be patient moving through that room, finding what it recognized. She looked up at the wall. Before she could speak, it knocked once, softly, the way you knock when you're not sure if you're welcome but you've been waiting a very long time. Mara counted under her breath, her lips barely moving. 39, 40, 41. The tapping had a patience to it that felt wrong in a way she could not name, not frantic, not accidental, but settled, like something that had decided long ago it could afford to wait. The television threw pale light across the room in silence, a nature documentary she had forgotten to unmute, and on the screen a field of tall grass rippled in a wind she could not hear. 42, 43, silence. She sat in it for a moment, her surgical boot heavy on the coffee table, the ace bandage beneath it still faintly damp from the walk-in from the car hours ago. She told herself pipes. She told herself the old oak in the backyard, its roots pushing further every year under the foundation. She told herself every reasonable thing a person tells themselves at 2 a.m. when the house they have lived in for 11 years decides to become unfamiliar. She shifted her weight forward and set her foot on the floor. From down the hall, somewhere near the linen closet or the bathroom beyond it, the tapping began again. The same rhythm, the same unhurried interval between each knock. Not pipes. Pipes did not relocate. Pipes did not wait for you to move before they answered. She sat very still again, her hand gripping the couch cushion beside her, and she began to count. She told herself the house was settling. Old homes breathed. Everyone knew that. They contracted in the cold like living things, pulling themselves inward against the night. She was overtired. The hydrocodone put a gauze over everything, softened the edges of the world, made shadows pull differently than they should. These were the reasonable explanations, and she arranged them in her mind the way you arrange furniture after a fright, filling up the open space. She knew this house. That was the thing she kept returning to as she finally pushed herself down the hall, her boots scuffing the runner, her hand trailing the wall. She knew it the way you know a person you have shared a bed with for years, not just their habits and their moods, but the specific grammar of their silences. The 1931 craftsman had taught her its language slowly, over 11 years, and she had learned to read it fluently. The radiators that hissed and knocked every November when the heat first came on. The third stair from the top that flexed under weight like a soft complaint. The basement door that breathed cold up through its frame in deep winter, a basement she'd never much liked and used only for the things she preferred not to look at often. None of those sounds were this sound. This sound had no history in the house. It had arrived from outside that language entirely, the way a stranger's handwriting appears in a book you thought only you had ever touched. She went to bed. She lay on her back in the dark and she listened to the silence hold. She called Deb the next afternoon because Deb was the kind of person who could make you feel foolish for being afraid, and feeling foolish was what Mara needed most. Deb answered on the second ring and started talking immediately, something about her neighbour's dog and a recycling bin, and Mara let herself be carried by the ordinary current of it. She paced the kitchen the way she always did on the phone, her boot heel striking the tile in a loose, unthinking rhythm, and she was laughing at something Deb had said when she stopped moving without meaning to. Her attention snagged by the word Deb had just used, and then the tapping started. She felt it before she fully heard it, a faint tremor travelling up through the sole of her boot, through her ankle, intimate and deliberate, as though something beneath the floor had been waiting for precisely this stillness. The sound came a half-second after, the same measured knock she had heard the night before, the same unhurried patience. She said quietly that it was happening again. Deb went silent in a way that had no humour in it. Mara described it, her voice careful and low, and when she finished, Deb asked how long it lasted. Mara said it always stopped when she moved. There was a pause on the line, long enough that Mara heard Deb exhale slowly, and then Deb said that was not how pipes worked. That night, Mara stood still in the living room and counted to 11 before it began. She moved. It stopped. She crossed to the hallway and waited. 11 seconds. She stood in the kitchen doorway, her hand against the frame, her eyes fixed on nothing. She counted. At 11, the floor beneath her spoke. She started with the county assessor's website because it was there, and because doing something felt better than counting seconds in a doorway. The records loaded slowly, the scanned pages grey and slightly warped at the edges the way old documents always were, as though the paper itself had resisted being remembered. The original permit was issued in 1931. The owner of record was listed as Callum Voss, single occupant, and the address matched exactly. Mara wrote the name down without knowing why. She found the newspaper archive through the county library's digital portal, a collection of local weeklies spanning nearly a century, their pages yellowed to amber even in reproduction. She searched his name without expectation and received one result. The item was 4 sentences long and ran beneath a notice about a church fundraiser, as though the editors had not known quite what category it belonged to. She read it twice. Then a third time, more slowly. Voss had been found in the basement, seated, eyes open. Perfectly still, the article said, and she could hear in that phrasing the particular discomfort of someone trying to describe a thing that did not have a clean word for it. Not dead, not sleeping, simply stopped. There was no follow-up. She searched for one for 20 minutes and found nothing. No hospital record, no subsequent mention, no quiet resolution. He had been carried out of this house into the public record and then dissolved from it entirely. She almost missed the date. When she registered it, she sat back in her chair and did not move for a long time. 11 days. She decided both things at once, the way you sometimes do when the mind runs out of room to keep arguing with itself. She was not a foolish person. She wanted that understood, if only by herself, sitting alone in the kitchen light with a dead man's name on a notepad. She had buried her mother and recovered from a surgery the doctors had spoken about in careful, measured tones, and she had signed the divorce papers on a Tuesday and gone back to work on Wednesday, because the alternative was a stillness she did not trust. She knew what she was. She was someone who needed to see the thing directly, because suspicion left to breathe in the dark grew into something far worse than any fact. The basement door opened on a pull-string light that swayed slightly, though she could not account for the draft. It was exactly what a basement should be. Boxes she'd never fully unpacked, their flaps folded shut with the particular optimism of someone who believed the move was temporary. The stationary bike with its cracked seat leaning against the far wall like something ashamed of itself. The water heater ticking softly in its corner, indifferent and alive in its small mechanical way. She almost did not look behind the coat rack. The chair faced the wall. High-backed, dark wood, old in the way that certain things are old, not worn out but worn in, shaped by long use into something particular. The concrete around its legs was smooth and pale, a slow circle of erasure, as though whatever had sat there had never quite been able to stop moving and had never once stood up. She stood at the bottom of the stairs and did not move toward the chair, and did not move back toward the stairs, and told herself this was a choice. 11 seconds. She counted them the way she had counted other unbearable things. Her mother's last breaths, the seconds between the surgeon's pause and his first word, the silence on the other end of the line before her ex-husband said what he said. Counting gave the hands something to do when the rest of you had gone somewhere far away. On the 12th second the tapping began. She had heard it from the kitchen as something approximate, something the mind was willing to negotiate with. Down here it was exact. The concrete transmitted it perfectly, the way cold water carries sound, clean and close and without distortion. 2 taps, a pause long enough to hold a breath. 2 taps, a pause. The interval never changed, not by a fraction, not by the small unconscious variations that come from muscle and fatigue and anything living. She knew the rhythm. She had used it herself on closed doors in quiet houses, on the doors of people she did not want to startle. It was a particular kindness, that rhythm, an announcement rather than a demand. It said, I am here and I am patient and I am not going to stop. The pull string swayed again above her. The light moved across the chair and the wall behind it in a slow pendulum arc, and the shadow the chair cast grew and shrank and grew, and the tapping continued and waited and continued. She went back upstairs. She did not decide to. Her body simply moved, the way bodies move when some older, quieter part of them has already made the calculation and is no longer interested in discussion. She sat down at the kitchen table and put her hands flat against the wood and listened to the house settle around her. It did not settle. That was the thing she had not noticed until now, sitting still, attending to it with the particular attention of a woman who had run out of ways to look away. The house was silent when she moved through it. The floors did not creak under her feet. The walls did not speak. But when she stopped, when she sat, when she held herself motionless and breathed slowly through her nose, the sounds came. Small adjustments, pressures, as though something below had been waiting for her to quit moving before it cared to speak. 2 taps, a pause, 2 taps. By 4 in the morning the sessions had grown. Not dramatically. A beat or 2 added each time, the way interest accrues, the way a patient thing extends itself when it senses a softening. She thought about Callum Voss in his chair. 11 days. She had read it as collapse, as crisis, as something that had happened to him. She understood now that she had been reading it wrong. You did not sit still for 11 days because you could not move. You sat still for 11 days because something had been teaching you how, because you had been practicing, because you were almost ready. She called Denny at dawn because Denny was the kind of person who answered, who would come without too many questions, who would bring coffee and noise and the specific gravity of another human body moving through rooms. The phone rang once. twice, and Mara stood in the kitchen holding it to her ear and watching the window go pale with early light, and the tapping below her had changed. It was longer now, more deliberate. It rose through the soles of her feet and into her bones, like something that had learned her frequency. She was waiting for the third ring when she noticed her weight had not shifted in 4 minutes. The realization arrived not as a shock, but as a slow, cold clarity. The way you understand something in a dream, a moment before it turns. She had not paced. She had not rolled her ankles or resettled her hips or done any of the 10,000 micro-adjustments a body makes when it is simply standing in a room and alive and unaware of itself. She had gone still. She had been listening so completely that her body had stopped remembering it was supposed to be doing anything else. She moved. Immediately, deliberately. 1 step sideways, heel to tile, and the sound beneath the floor cut off as though she had covered a drain. The silence that followed was worse than the tapping, because she did not know when it had started. She did not know if 4 minutes was the number, or if the number had once been larger and was, quietly, becoming less.